Chief Marketing Officer here at SharpSpring, and welcome to another installment of the Agency Acceleration Series. This is the 13th installment if you're following along at home there. And we're bringing home this year, next week, next Thursday, with Seth Godin. But today we are excited to welcome Karl Sakas, and he's going to be talking about a topic that has received a lot of interest, which is work less and earn more. And who doesn't want to do that? If you are new to this series and you're not familiar with SharpSpring, SharpSpring is a revenue growth platform built with sales and marketing automation tools. And we really help our customers drive more leads, boost conversions, and drive those conversions throughout your funnel and really drive better results for yourselves as an agency and for your customers as well. And so agencies really are very important to SharpSpring, and we've really built our whole business around agencies, which is why we started the Agency Acceleration Series. And today's content is going to be great, and we'll bring that slide back up and talk a little bit more about Karl. So Karl Sakas is definitely a friend of SharpSpring, and we're happy to have him back. We've had him on a few previous webinars, and Karl's an agency consultant, and he helps agency leaders calm the chaos of running their business through consulting, coaching, and training. And you'll see from the presentation we have today just exactly how Karl's approach is very mindful and purposeful and is sort of calming in a way, and such to the fact that people call him their agency therapist. And I'm going to ask Karl a little bit more about that. He's the author of Made to Lead, which is a pocket guide to managing marketing and creative teams. And we are going to be able to offer that to attendees that get a demo of SharpSpring, and you can get a signed version of Karl's book there. And we will put that link in the chat area, so you should be able to click on over. If you register again for a demo, you get a signed copy of that book. And so when he's not advising agencies, Karl is volunteering as a bartender on an antique train. So maybe we'll ask Karl a little bit about that as well. So how this works today, by the way, is before we bring Karl up, we're going to show a pre-recorded version of a session that he did for us, focusing on this topic, work less and earn more. And then we're going to go to live Q&A, where I'm going to pose some questions to Karl, and I'm going to take all of your questions as well. If you want to chat them in, I'll make sure that I incorporate as many as possible and pose them to Karl. So with that, I'm going to sign off for a second here. We're going to bring Karl's session up, and I'll see you in about 10-15 minutes. Thanks.
Hi, agency consultant Karl Sakas here. Thanks for joining today to help you find ways to work less and earn more at your agency. This advice is most applicable if you're in an ownership role at your agency, or an executive or managerial role. But if you're not, that's okay. The advice will help you too, because you can help the owners and managers make life easier for themselves, and that'll make things better for you. So thanks for joining. And of course, stick around. I look forward to answering your questions during the live Q&A. So this is about work less and earn more, and it's based on my experience helping hundreds of agencies all over the world. Think back to when you started your agency or when you joined your agency. You probably had some particular dreams or ideas or direction in mind. Think back to, how has that worked out? Thinking about the present. Are you currently doing the things you want to do, or things you feel like you have to do? And let's also think ahead to the future. Where do you want to go? Are you looking to grow your agency to sell, or are you looking to run a highly profitable, smoothly running lifestyle agency? Either of those are fine, and you could be somewhere in the middle, but it helps to know where you want to go. Once you know where you want to go, though, you can find ways to work less and earn more. And in my work with hundreds of agencies all over the world, I've identified 4 stages that you can be in as you run your agency. And that's important because once you understand the stage or the stages you're in now, and the stages where you want to go, you can take specific steps to make that transition happen. And this applies regardless of where your agency's services focus, whether you're, for instance, new to marketing automation or you're a seasoned marketing automation expert as you're growing and building your agency. So let's take a look at the 4 stages and, importantly, what you can do next to move forward and make things easier. Think of it as a gas gauge or a meter, and there are 4 stages on that meter. And as we're going along, think about which stage or stages you might be in today, and then, of course, where you want to go. Stage 1 is you are mandatory. You are mandatory on a day-to-day basis. You can't get away. You know, if you take a break for lunch, you probably come back and you know that something will have blown up. The idea of taking a true vacation is inconceivable. When you're mandatory, you are mandatory to everything happening day to day. You're probably the primary client contact. Your team probably is not making great decisions. They're making things worse. It's a challenge. Good news, there is hope. You can move to stage 2. What's stage 2? Stage 2 is now you are merely necessary. Still not great, but you're able to get away for, a few days at a time. Your team is helping out. They're, getting things done. They're not always making great decisions. When you're necessary, you're still doing a lot of cleanup, a lot of firefighting. As one of my clients in Portugal said, I know there's always going to be some firefighting. I just wish it wasn't a different part of the barn on fire every single day, every single week. If that sounds familiar, you're able to unplug a little bit from your agency, get away for a few days. You may be in stage 2. You may be necessary on a day-to-day basis. Well, where do you go from there? Then it's time to move on to stage 3. Stage 3 is needed. You are now needed, but not necessary. Now, where did that phrase come from? Well, it's a phrase that originally started with investor Mark Cuban. He talks about when he makes investments, he wants his investment to be needed, but not necessary. That is to say, they need the money, they need the investment, but it's not necessary in the sense that they would go out of business if they didn't get the investment. I've applied the needed but not necessary concept to apply to running or managing an agency. How so? Well, when you are needed but not necessary, stage 3 in the day-to-day involvement meter, you are, just that, needed. You're not going to disappear for a year and, never talk to anyone and come back and things would be running fine. That's not what needed is. However, you are not necessary to the team's day-to-day functioning. When you are needed but not necessary, stage 3, your team is getting things done. You can go on vacation for a week or 2 and things run smoothly. You're not getting interrupted all the time with new fires to put out. Needed is a nice place to be. And many people choose to stay at stage 3, choose to be needed. Life is good. But you may want to go further. And if you want to go further, you can pursue stage 4. Stage 4 is making yourself optional. When you are optional on a day-to-day basis in running your agency, you are, just that, you're optional. You don't have to be there. You don't have to make every single decision. You probably don't have any day-to-day client contacts. You may still work with clients in some capacity, but you're not the first person they call when something needs to happen. Optional is really helpful if you're looking to sell your agency, if you have an exit in mind. Whether that's, in the next couple of years or a bit further out, the more optional you can make yourself if you're looking to sell, the easier it'll be to sell and probably the better offer or offers you would get, because after all, you're optional. You're not critical to marketing and other aspects of lead gen. You're not the one running the marketing automation campaigns for your clients and things like that. But optional applies even if you want to run a lifestyle agency. Most agencies are lifestyle agencies. Your goal, if your focus is running a lifestyle agency, ultimately is to run a highly profitable, stable, and fun to operate agency, where for you, your role as the owner, once you're optional in running a lifestyle agency or in a leadership role, you're doing the things you like doing. And if you're listening today and you're not in an ownership or leadership role, ultimately you can work to support the owners and leaders in making themselves optional, and that creates new opportunities for you as well. Now, how do you get from stage to stage? Well, first, you need to know where you are currently. So thinking about those 4 stages, 1, 2, 3, and 4, mandatory, necessary, needed, and optional. Take a moment to think for yourself, where are you today? Are you currently mandatory, putting out fires all day long and you can't get away to lunch without something blowing up? Have you moved to necessary, where you can get away for a bit, but it's not uninterrupted? Maybe you're not the client contact for everyone, but things tend to escalate to you pretty often. Are you in stage 3, needed, where your team is handling most things day to day? You're still involved in various ways, but things are generally running smoothly. Or are you in stage 4? You are optional. And by the way, it is normal to be in more than one stage at once. For instance, maybe you are necessary for sales, but you are optional when it comes to client delivery. And the key thing is you can define this to work however you want. What you want to do may not be what someone else wants to do, and that's okay. This is about creating your ideal agency, not someone else's version, because it's your business. So think about which stage you're in, and go ahead and write it down, or feel free to share. Which stage are you in now? The second point to consider is, which stage do you want to be in? You're currently, say, in mandatory, necessary, needed. Perhaps you're in optional. What is the stage you want to be in? Do you want to become, for instance, needed, stage 3? Would you be happy to be there? Or do you want to advance to optional, stage 4? There's not one right answer, but once you know where you are and where you want to go, you can work backwards to get there. And in my work with hundreds of agencies all over the world, I've identified certain things you can do at each stage to help you move up a stage, to help you work less and earn more. So now that you've taken a moment to identify which stage you're in and where you want to go, let's take a look at the shortcuts to help you move up each of the stages. And then in Q&A, I'm glad to dig in to help you refine which stage you might be in and help you troubleshoot how to take those next steps to help you move forward and help you make life better, thanks to SharpSpring. So let's take a look. So imagine that you were focused on your quality of life. What is your quality of life as an agency leader? Well, every time you move up those stages, your quality of life is going up. So for instance, when you're mandatory, your quality of life is not very good. When you go from mandatory to necessary, things get better. Things get a lot better when you become needed, but not necessary. And if you choose to become optional, well, things are pretty amazing, because after all, you are optional in your business. You can sell it if you choose, and you can keep running it. And if you keep running it, you're doing the things you like doing, not the things you have to do, because you're getting your team's support. So how do we make each of these jumps? Well, there's a particular place to focus for each one. So remember, think about where you are now, where you want to go, and following along, which of these suggestions will be most applicable to you. So, how to move up. If you're currently mandatory and you want to move to necessary, it's about a concept I call swim lanes. What are swim lanes? Swim lanes are making it clear who's in charge of what and who's not in charge of what. So for instance, if you're at an agency that has multiple business partners, ideally, each of the partners is in charge of specific things, and you don't have overlapping responsibilities. Why? When you have clear swim lanes, it's easier for people to make decisions because it is primarily their decision. That's not to say that you shouldn't seek input or get input from others, but ultimately the goal is that there is one decision maker in each area. Maybe one of your key team members is making decisions about creative and marketing outputs. Another person is deciding about business operations. Another person is deciding about sales and about marketing. There's going to be some overlap, of course, and you'll probably wear more than one hat. The key thing, though, is that there is one final decision maker in each major area. That's the idea of swim lanes. The other benefit of swim lanes is that when you get clear on swim lanes, you can move from mandatory to necessary because people know where they are empowered to make decisions and where they're not, right? So that things escalate to you when you're, when you're must have for the situation, rather than because people have no idea what's going on. So that's the move from mandatory to necessary. Swim lanes. And in Q&A, I'm glad to help dig into that to help you sort that out at your agency. What if you are currently necessary, or you've moved to necessary and you want to become needed but not necessary? That's a concept I call values, goals, and resources, or VGR. What's the idea there? Well, values, goals, and resources are a decision-making shortcut. I worked with the owner of an agency several years ago where the owner said, I keep getting interrupted all day long by my team. I can't get away. It's like, there's always some problem. They always need my help. This was a situation where, under the day-to-day involvement meter, he was necessary. He hadn't made it to needed. And as I dug in with him, it turned out that this was partly his own fault. Whenever his team made decisions without him, he often was overruling their decisions. He hadn't defined swim lanes, and also his team didn't know the values, goals, and resources to follow in making decisions, both within the agency and in helping their clients. My solution was to help him understand the values, goals, and resources, which were unique to him and his agency, for the team to follow, so they can make better decisions without having to ask him every single time. Ultimately, by following that advice, he was able to move from necessary to needed. So if you're currently necessary and you want to move from stage 2 to stage 3, you want to become needed, define values, goals, and resources. And those could apply both at the agency level and for individual clients. In Q&A, glad to dig in further on values, goals, and resources, VGR. What if you have made it to needed? You are now needed but not necessary. Congratulations, you're in stage 3, and you're choosing to pursue stage 4. You want to go from needed to make yourself increasingly optional. How do you get there? You need to focus on hiring and coaching. So the idea is that when you're needed, things are running pretty smoothly, but you're still involved to an extent. If you want your team to take on more and more of those responsibilities for you to become optional, you need to hire the right people and you need to coach them on improving. They're not just going to magically get there. I was working with a client who was frustrated that, when they shared certain things with the team wouldn't just start doing, what they said. And ultimately, as I dug in, I found that, the agency owner would share something and then expect that everyone could just, read their mind and apply it. That's not the case. Even if you have a great team, what I describe as new rope rather than wet twine, even if you've got 100% new rope, you've hired the right people, they still need coaching to help them improve on getting things done. So that's hiring and coaching. Now what? Well, in Q&A, I'm looking forward to digging in to help you sort out, what are the right choices for you and your agency? How do you move up each of the stages to help you work less and earn more? And, ultimately how to make life easier. So I look forward to answering your questions shortly. And, thanks for being here today, joining me in SharpSpring to make things better.
Hey, everyone, and welcome back. And thanks for taking the time to watch that session with Karl. And let's bring Karl up on camera here. Karl, how are you?
Doing well, and you?
I'm doing great. Yeah, nice to see you. Thanks again. Great session. And there's a lot of practical advice in there. It kind of makes me think of a number of the agency founders that I know or am familiar with, and they kind of find themselves trying to move towards optional, but they're very, very capable themselves, especially at specific tasks inside of the agency.
Mm.
And so that kind of forms the basis for my first few questions here, which is, the first one is, which role should an agency owner hire next to get work off their plate?
That's one of those, it depends. It depends on where you are now. If you are early in running your agency and you are the client contact for everyone, part of the goal is to get some of that off your plate, but it's easier to outsource some of the more back office activities, your subject matter expert roles. So I would start with that. Whether, depending on what your agency focuses on, it could be, a marketing implementer, it could be designer, it could be developer. The idea is that you get that outsourced, perhaps to freelancers initially. You continue to be the client contact, maybe continue to do project management. And then over time, as other people are doing more and more of the highly billable work, your subject matter experts, eventually you can start shifting some of the project management and or account management off your plate. But I would start by making sure that other people are doing as much of the highly billable client work as possible. You should still bill for account management and project management, but that's where I'd start.
Okay. You had mentioned, an agency owner that you were working with that was talking about, going into a room and kind of explaining things high level and then wondering why via osmosis or something that his team wasn't picking up how to do it.
Right.
And so, often, somebody leading an agency is not necessarily, born to be a phenomenal developer of people. So that's definitely a skill to learn, and the session is a very practical approach to think through some of that. So, how can agency leaders get better at coaching? Can you drill into that a little bit? What are your suggestions?
Well, I believe that, leaders are made rather than born. There are some people who may be naturally talented at leading others and managing teams, but anyone can get better at it if you want to. As I share, we were talking about the Made to Lead book, and if you do the demo, you can get a signed copy of this. Your team can't read your mind. And it's also really easy to be a bad boss. It's really hard to be a good boss. Yet, if you commit to improving as a manager, as a leader, you absolutely can. And, in terms of where to start, I would start by getting some feedback from people you trust, people who know you and are willing to give you, honest answers about your strengths and weaknesses as a leader. One way to look at that is a model called warmth and competence, which comes from the book The Human Brand by Chris Malone and Susan Fisk. And the idea there is that whenever people are interacting with you or with a company or what have you, there's warmth, there's competence. And ideally, you're high warmth and high competence. Competence is to get the job done. High warmth is, do you make people feel special? Most people tend to skew one way or the other as they interact with clients and as they interact with people as a manager. Try to identify where do you struggle and then find ways to build on that weakness. And, because there are limits to how far we can build on weaknesses, bring in other people to help fill in your weaknesses where something might be your weakness, but it's their strength.
What was that again, Karl? Warmth and competence?
Warmth and competence from the book The Human Brand by Malone and Fisk. Chris Malone is a former Fortune 500 CMO, and Susan Fisk is a psychology professor at Princeton.
That's an interesting combination. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah.
It kind of makes me wonder about, you've been called an agency therapist. And that last bit of advice definitely kind of picks up. I mean, heck, there's a psychologist who co-wrote that book, right? So, but you yourself have been called the agency therapist. I think I get why, but what does that mean to you? And why do you think that is?
So many of my clients have called me, their agency therapist. I do clarify, I'm not an actual therapist. Yeah. Most people should have a therapist. I've been doing therapy for 20 years. But the idea there is that, for many of the agency owners I work with, hundreds all over the world, I am their sounding board. I am the person that they can share their concerns with. If they're worried about something, they often can't talk to their team about it, and they probably shouldn't to a point. If they have a business partner, there are limits to what they can share with their business partner. If they're in a romantic relationship, their partner or spouse probably isn't an expert on running an agency. And either way, eventually, your spouse or partner is going to get tired of hearing about the agency all the time. So I feel, I feel grateful that I can be that person, that agency therapist for many of my clients. As one client said, he was very stressed out at the beginning of the coaching call, and by the end, I checked in, and they said that I had helped them calm the chaos, and that made my day.
That would definitely make my day as well, knowing that I've had that reaction on a client. So, the title again of this session, Karl, was Work Less, Earn More. And
Yeah.
I mentioned at the beginning, a lot of people are just probably these days, there might be a number of people joining us today that are just trying to earn more and can continue from their path historically, because 2020 is challenging for some and it may be less so for others, depending on what niche they're serving. So, we're all crossing our fingers now. There's good news that there's a vaccine coming through for very, very soon. But how do you think about the world for agencies in 2021, and what do you think will be the biggest challenges, for agencies as we're planning our year and trying to frankly earn more and work a little bit less?
Yes, indeed. 2020 has been a challenging year. I think people are very excited about 2021, the calendar changing. There are a few pieces to consider. One, this is an opportunity for you to make your clients the hero. If you're familiar with the idea of the hero's journey, StoryBrand talks about it, but it dates back to the 1940s with Joseph Campbell.
Love Joseph Campbell, yeah.
Yeah, what's now become the hero's journey. And where I see a lot of agencies struggle is that the owner or leaders or other people at the agency frame, when it comes to their marketing and other interactions, frame the agency as the hero, right? We're doing great things, this and that. And you know what? We're all the hero of our own lives. But my advice in 2021 and beyond is to find ways to make your client the hero and your agency is the helper. Now, what's the difference about that? Well, ultimately, when you make your client the hero, you are about helping them accomplish their heroic goals, whatever those might be, whether it's growing their business to sell it or just hitting their KPIs for the coming quarter. And when you make your clients the hero, your agency is positioned as their core helper. And you know what? Your clients are going to keep you forever because you're making them the hero and you are the critical helper in the background. If you've ever had one of your clients take an idea that you shared and they presented it to their boss as their own, you know what? That's a win. You are the helper in the background making them look good. And so I think that's an important opportunity. It's a challenge, but also an opportunity for 2021 about making your clients the hero.
I love that, and I love the story brand concept built around putting your customers at the center of your entire messaging strategy. Really, as I asked that question, a very similar question came in from somebody on the call today. Jose, any special recommendations for the post-COVID remote agency? And you touched on a lot of that, but other tools, structure, models, things that you want to provide recommendations on, Karl?
Yeah. Jose, thank you for joining and for the question. Of course, the very recent news, if you're watching live, is around Salesforce announcing that they're going to acquire Slack. So oftentimes people focus on tools, and tools are important. We can't do our work without the right tools, whether that's automation-wise or otherwise. But it's also important to get your processes right and to get your priorities right. You don't want to automate a bad process. That's not going to go smoothly. So ultimately, you want to get clear on where you want to go. Are you growing your agency to sell it? Are you growing it to run a lifestyle business? And also, what do your clients want? The more you understand about everyone's, as I shared earlier, their VGR, their values, goals, and resources, you can make better choices along the way. So I would get clear on the values, goals, and resources involved, whether that's at an agency level or, if you're looking more in terms of, your clients' values, goals, and resources, that'll help you get better results. Does that help? I'm glad to dig deeper on any of that.
It helps for me a lot. And, um, when I think back about the model, as it applies to just being more productive and effective in 2021, I mean, clearly that's a great roadmap for doing it. Some questions are coming in, Karl, wondering, again, kind of back to your model.
Mhm.
You know, is it possible to be in one stage kind of shifting to another? I assume it could apply to, multiple leaders in the organization as well, might be at different phases, trying to kind of transition and coach the team and move forward. So,
Absolutely. It is totally normal to be in more than one stage at once. I just brought up here, a copy of the meter: mandatory, necessary, needed, and optional. You may be, for instance, say you've been running your agency for a few years. Maybe you're in a circumstance where you are, needed for most day-to-day client delivery, but maybe you're necessary from a sales perspective, or maybe something else. The key thing with that is that you want to shift things to make it the agency you want. So, for instance, if you want to do sales, great, keep doing sales. If you don't want to do it, then it makes sense to outsource it and get some help there. And you can also chunk that out. Indeed, you can be in multiple stages depending on the specific area you're working on. So I would say get clear on the stage you're in now and the stage where you want to go, and then you can follow those shortcuts I mentioned to make each of the leaps.
that's helpful. And a good question just came in, because there are certainly some, and this question is from Jeff, because I assume some agency founders or owners are kind of positioning themselves as part of the value proposition for doing business with their agency. And so you're having to pull that away potentially from how you're pitching yourself, I would assume. But, so the question is, how do you transition to needed or optional without clients feeling spooked about no longer working with you on a day-to-day basis?
Indeed. Indeed. Well, that's actually something I'll be talking about in my upcoming agency growth bootcamp, about helping people, agency owners in particular, helping them, find ways to work less and earn more. Think of it on a two-pronged basis. So the idea there is that you're probably not going to eliminate yourself as the client contact for all of your existing clients immediately. And some clients may never want to lose you as their contact. If you're like, we're going to move you over to someone else, they might be like, I'm either working with you or not with your agency at all. So, there is a two-pronged approach. I'm glad to dig in on how to do some of those transitions. But consider it's a lot easier to make other people the contact for new clients you haven't worked with at all together. Because in that case, they don't know. I mean, ultimately, you're basically saying, say if you're leading the sales process, you could say to the client, this seems like a fit. We've evaluated things, this and that. Here is so-and-so. They are your account manager. They're going to take amazing care of you. And I'm always available to answer questions if needed, but they are the perfect person to help you meet your goals. And ideally, you've introduced the account manager, sometime sooner than the very end of the sales process, so that clients have, met them from day one, rather than suddenly, thinking, well, wait, who is this random person? So, ultimately for new clients, do that immediately, transition people over. When it comes to existing clients, I actually have a model for that. It's my agency role categories framework. And the idea is that there are ultimately 6 agency roles: AM, or account management; PM, project management; your SMEs, subject matter experts; strategist, biz dev, and support. And so this is an opportunity. If you're feeling overwhelmed as you run your agency, you can shift some of these. So maybe you'll continue to be the account manager, but maybe you get someone else to handle the back end, more internally oriented project management. Maybe it's a circumstance where you continue doing the strategy work, but you don't do AM, PM, and SME, right? They sort of bring you in when they need your help on the strategy. A lot of agency owners describe saying that they want to do strategy, high-end strategy, and they also want to do business development, some aspect of that. And that combo, I call that combo the Don Draper or Donna Draper, in the sense that, like thinking of the TV show Mad Men, that was ultimately his role. If we tie Mad Men to the 6 roles, he would do sales and land new business, and then he would do the creative strategy, but other people would do all of the execution beyond that. And certainly he was doing nothing in terms of the support around operations and a little bit with leadership. And to clarify, I don't recommend running your agency as if you were Don Draper. But if you want to do, for instance, sales and client strategy, that's an option. But that does mean getting other people on board to handle the other things if you're currently doing those now.
Yeah, I mean, if you fully move to the optional stage and you like to drink martinis at noon, then you're good being Don Draper. But for most of us, it's not such a productive work habit.
Yes.
So there's some questions coming in on coaching and hiring, Karl, and this is sort of a 2-part question that came in from MamboCom PR. I assume that's not somebody's name. That's their agency. How do you determine your best zone of genius for your agency, number one, so you can hire the right people for growth?
Sure. So looking at it and thinking about the first question about your zone of genius. I mean, what do you enjoy doing? What do you find yourself drawn to? That's probably what you like. That might be your zone of genius. And then what are the things that you find you avoid, right? What are the things that, no matter what, you find any opportunity, any excuse to stop doing it? It's sort of what, from your perspective, what is the dessert? That's probably what you want to do more of. And, what are the vegetables? And you know what? Some vegetables are great, but, not quite the same. And a model for that I've developed, if you think of it as a Venn diagram, my model for that is desire, competence, and capacity. That is, if something isn't getting done, you need to have desire, wanting to do it, competence, knowing how to do it, and capacity, having time primarily to get it done. When it comes to owners, often they have the desire to do something, they have the competence to do something, they don't have the capacity, the time to get it done. But if there's something that you keep procrastinating on, take a look at, do you not have the desire to do it? If it's something that you don't have the desire to do and it doesn't have to happen, you know what? Don't do it. On the other hand, if it's something that needs to get done, but you don't want to do it, then you can delegate that to someone else. That's actually one of the stages in the Work Less or Earn More Bootcamp around, I call it the 4 Ds: do, drop, delegate, or defer. Either sometimes you do it yourself, other times you're going to drop it, like you just don't do it at all. But more often you're going to delegate it to someone else, or maybe you defer it. Maybe you still do it, but not now. So get clear ultimately on what you like doing, and you can look at where you choose to spend your time as a proxy or an indicator for that. But you probably know the answer. And then what you don't like doing, and figure out, working with your team, ways to do more of what you want and less of what you don't. What was the part you said? There was a 2-part. What was part 2?
Part 2 is so you can hire the right people for your growth.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, think about those 6 agency role categories, and it's normal for people to wear more than one hat. As a consultant, for instance, I am doing account management. I'm also doing strategy. I'm doing both of those, and it's normal to have that combined. But as your agency grows, ideally, you're going to start splitting them out. And that becomes part of your agency structure decisions. For instance, a lot of agencies in the early days have someone who is an account manager and project manager in one, but they're different skill sets. Account manager is more about relationships, project manager is more about the details and profitability. Ideally, you've got 2 different people doing those roles so that they're not skewing one way or the other.
Got it. There's a piece of that definitely related to an agency leader or principal again, trying to develop their people. And in doing so, they need to determine who are the good leaders, who can best take my place when I'm not around, or who should I be grooming? And so, a question came in from Sharky saying, how do you determine who those people are? How do you determine somebody that's a good leader on your team, Karl?
Well, a couple indicators. One is they express interest in leadership. That's a good sign. That suggests they have desire. They may not necessarily have competence. You're going to have to weigh that. But, a hand raise is an important piece. The second piece, though, is you may have people who have the potential to be leaders, but for various reasons don't feel safe raising their hand, or they might have imposter syndrome, where they could be a leader, but they think they aren't. And so it's up to you, where if someone raises their hand about taking a leadership role, to evaluate, do they have the desire, competence, and capacity to do it? And if people aren't raising their hands, your job as a leader yourself at your agency is to sort out, are there people who have potential that you could develop to be future leaders, but they may not have the confidence at the moment to step up and take those roles. And also consider, what are some things you can do for, if people have potential, for them to demonstrate their interest rather than saying, yes, they want your job in the future. Because a lot of times people think ahead to if they're a manager, if they're a director, if they're the owner of an agency, ultimately they're often thinking about getting paid a lot of money and having a nice title. And certainly those are helpful things, but there are a lot of downsides. Being a manager is really difficult. Like I said, it's easy to be a bad manager. It's really hard to be a good or great manager. So I want to make sure that they understand what they're getting into. For instance, I was working with a client in Colorado where two of their team members wanted to get promoted to become director of one of their departments. The existing department director had moved on to a new job, and two people on the team said they were interested. My advice, as I was coaching the owner of the agency, was this. Said, have them read Made to Lead. It's a quick read, by the way. It's literally a pocket guide, like 20 to 30 minutes. And then you can go back and refer to the tips later. I said, assign them to read the book and then write effectively a book report for you, reporting back about what stood out to them. What were the themes they noticed, and where do they see themselves doing well, and where do they see themselves struggling? It's an opportunity for them to, for the owner to see, are they going to do the work? Are they going to, do they have a good sense of self-awareness, things like that? And then ultimately he could compare both what they wrote as well as how they approach the process to decide which person gets the promotion. The result? Well, one of the employees did the work, did the analysis, reported back, ended up actually sending me an update. Like I wasn't coaching him directly, but sent an update on how things were going. The other employee didn't want to do this at all. The idea of spending 20, 30 minutes on a book to understand, what's going on and, strengths, weaknesses, maybe they didn't want to be a manager after all. And you know what? That's okay. If someone doesn't want to be a manager, that's totally fine. But ultimately that exercise helped the owner figure out who was the right person. And they ultimately promoted the one who did the work and, went from there.
That's great. So, hey, shifting gears really quick here, Karl, and I know that we probably have time for a few more questions. So after this one, I think I'm just going to talk about what's next in the series and then pose a few more questions, but I just want to be mindful of your time and everybody else's.
Yeah.
So you talk to hundreds of agencies, Karl, right? So, if you could recommend that agencies get stronger in one area only, what would it be and why?
The better you are at your own marketing, thinking of the shoemaker's kids problem, the better you are at your marketing, the easier everything else will be. If you're good at marketing, you'll have a strong marketing pipeline that'll help you build a strong sales pipeline. If we think about business development, it's marketing, sales, and partnerships. Ultimately, the stronger your pipeline, the easier everything else is. You aren't panicking about future revenue. Ideally, you've shifted your agency to build a significant amount of recurring revenue along the way. And of course, a marketing automation retainer is a great way to do that. And ultimately, your team won't be panicking about, oh, we don't have any work in the queue because, the pipeline is dry. That's where I see agencies struggle the most with the shoemaker's kids problem, right?
Mhm.
The shoemaker's kids don't have any shoes. Agencies often struggle with their own marketing. And, a question I'll get a lot is, how should I market my own agency? Marketing is complicated and challenging. That's why your clients hire your agency, right? They could do it themselves, but they choose to get your specialized expertise. Ultimately, I would say make sure you're using your own services in your marketing. If you're a content marketing agency, your own content should be really good.
Mhm.
And it's not just, of course, creating the content, it's using marketing automation to stay in front of people. But if you're, say, a video agency and you don't use video, people are going to be like, well, wait a minute, why should I pay you? You don't seem to believe in this service yourself. That kind of thing. If you're social media oriented, social media, and so on. That's where I'd start. Focus on improving your own marketing, improving your own funnel, so that you can make more confident decisions rather than potentially desperate decisions because your agency is struggling because the pipeline is dry.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, Karl. And it's honestly, it was the first thing that popped in my mind, and it sounds like validated by hundreds of discussions that you've had with agencies. So I want to bring up a few slides and just talk about what's next in the Agency Acceleration Series, and then we're going to come back. So as I mentioned at the beginning of today's session, we have Seth Godin here joining us on December 10th at 12 p.m. Eastern. And I am a huge fan of Seth, and he's been sort of a luminary and influencer in the digital marketing, the permission-based marketing space now for 20 plus years. And he's got a strong podcast called Akimbo, and nice. He's another person like Karl, by the way, who just has a real nice way about him when he talks, and is just full of knowledge about the world in general. But I can't encourage you enough to, check out certainly Seth's podcast, Akimbo. But I would please do put it on your calendar and see if you can attend next week. I think the other thing that I want to cover here is just a reminder that you can get a copy of Karl's book. We have a link there that you can sign up for a demo, and if you don't want to buy it on Amazon like I just saw somebody did, you can head on over to have a demo of SharpSpring. We'd love to show you the revenue growth platform. We think it's really powerful for agencies. It is as such for the 2,000 plus that are on our platform today. And finally, want to make sure that you just let us know how you're enjoying this series, and you can take the survey there at sharpspring.com/Karl survey, and please do that. And so this is the point in the session, Karl, where I pose a question to you from the next guest, which is from Seth Godin, then, of course. And Seth asks, what's the biggest opportunity you see for agencies going into 2021?
Well, certainly everyone is very happy to move on to 2021 and beyond. I'd say the biggest opportunity is to get clear on what you want at your agency, what you want long term. That is, day to day, it's very easy to get sucked into day to day firefighting and challenges. Your team wants your time, your clients want your time, your prospects. Well, hopefully your prospects want your time. That sort of a double-edged sword. The thing is, no one is demanding your time to plan for the future. No one is putting that meeting on your calendar to say, where do you want to be in 5 years? And part of my work as a coach is being that person who's like, so where do you want to go? Because once we know, as Stephen Covey said, begin with the end in mind. If you know where you want to go, we can work backwards to get there. But you need to get clear on where there is in the first place. So that's the biggest opportunity. making your agency the agency you want. That's true if you're the owner of your agency. It's also true if you're in a leadership role, or really any role in supporting the owners and reaching their goals. You know, if you're not the owner and you make the owner of your agency the hero and you're the helper, it makes you indispensable, or, you know, as a linchpin, as Seth Godin has written in one of the many books.
Linchpin, yeah.
Yeah.
One of my favorite books, by the way, from him is Purple Cow, and becoming truly remarkable, you know, such that people would sit up and look at whatever you're doing as much as strangely as they would look at a purple cow. But anyway, I don't have a question for you on that, Karl, but I just want to say it's one of the things that seems so basic, but it's phenomenal advice for anybody trying to develop a project for themselves or for a customer that's truly remarkable.
You know, and speaking of remarkable and Seth, I love that the format coming up with him is Q&A, because I think a lot of people have read his advice and, you know, have read books and his blog and this and that. But if you haven't seen him do live Q&A, he's amazing at it. For instance, I went to a workshop he did in New York a number of years back. There were about 100 people in the auditorium, you know, kind of a half day. It was his impresario workshop. And the thing that stood out to me is that he shared content. The content was great. And then he said, we're going to do Q&A. And he answered questions from probably half the audience.
Wow.
And the thing that stood out was that people would share these long rambling questions, and in an instant, he would reframe their complex rambling question in a sentence or two, and then share an amazing answer. And I knew that this wasn't, you know, pre-prepared or anything, because I asked him a question that I hadn't submitted in advance, and, you know, and he had a great answer. So you're in for a treat. Definitely go to his SharpSpring event.
Yeah, thanks, Karl. We're really excited to have him for that Q&A. He's sort of like, as you mentioned, he's sort of like going to an improv show, and the questions from the audience section at the end is always the best part of the show. Just watching the improv actors think on their feet, and Seth is phenomenal on his feet just because the wealth of knowledge is there. So after talking about those things, I feel almost bad bringing it back here, but there are a few other questions that I want to definitely hit.
I want to answer as many questions as I can.
For sure. Yeah. So because we've talked a lot about the agency themselves and building, you know, making the most of the talent within your agency. But Brian here asks, and it's a super relevant question for how a lot of us do business these days. How do you effectively use freelancers to service clients?
Freelancers are a great way for your agency to expand services. You're primarily going to hire freelancers for your subject matter expert work, including the strategist-related role. It's hard to outsource account management and project management. So if we focus on the SME, the subject matter expert side of things, freelancers are a great way to scale your agency up as new work comes in, or potentially down if there's a bit of a lull, if you haven't built up your marketing and sales pipeline. So that's helpful. A key inflection point that I see for agencies, and this is a good guideline to keep in mind, the guideline is there's a certain point where it makes sense to go from part-time freelancer to hiring a full-time employee. And that point is when someone is doing 15 to 20 hours a week, every week. It's probably time to hire someone full-time. Ideally, that person full-time if they're new rope rather than wet twine. But the idea there is that you're generally paying freelancers about twice as much per hour as you would pay a full-time employee. So when you're at the point of 15 to 20 hours a week, you're basically paying almost as much as if you paid someone full-time. There are other factors involved in that as well, of course, but keep an eye on that. As you're consistently doing 15 to 20 hours per freelancer or in a particular area, probably makes sense to hire someone full-time.
That is an excellent tip, Karl. Thank you for that. And I want to be mindful of time again. Yeah, I saw one question, so we'll make the last question kind of fun, Karl. Can you tell us about the poster behind you?
Yeah, so this is a British transit ad for Penguin biscuits, Penguin cookies. This poster was at a previous agency where I was the operations head. And when they did some redecorating, I ended up buying the poster. from the agency. It's like 6 feet tall. So Penguin apparently in the 90s had come out with a dark chocolate option. So hence Penguin in the dark. My Googling since then is that apparently the test market didn't catch on. Penguin still exists, but it looks like the dark chocolate was a limited edition. You know, and certainly the tie-in to my work, I've worked with agencies on every inhabited continent. So all 6 inhabited continents. Antarctica doesn't have any agencies, but when the Penguins get an agency, I'll be there to help.
Perfect. Well, Karl, thanks again. It's so great to have you. And from my standpoint, by the way, dark chocolate is the best of all the chocolates. As I mentioned, you know, we're hoping to, you know, have season 2, as it were, for the Agency Acceleration Series in 2021. So please stay tuned. Of course, if you sign up for this series, or if you sign up for the next one, we'll certainly tell you about what's happening next year. And we're excited to have you back, Karl. And if you posed a question and we didn't get to it, we'll try to make sure that we get those to Karl, and we'll figure out a way to get the answers to you. Also, we tend to do scripts from these webinars and post them as blogs, you know, so you'll be able to see those on our websites as well. And I think that's it, Karl. Thanks again. Really enjoyed having you.
Thank you, and good luck, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Really